I never imagined the day I would watch my own daughter sell the medals I earned in blood for a measly $200. The display case, once gleaming under the soft study light of our New Orleans home, sat empty, its velvet lining cold and mocking. I picked up a crumpled receipt from the mahogany desk. December 3rd, 2022, $200 paid in cash. My hands shook, the ink smudged and curled at the edges, as if even the paper itself was laughing at me. A winter wind whistled through the half-open window, carrying the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from the street below. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light, each one taunting a memory, a sacrifice, a deployment gone unnoticed. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I sat down hard, knees hitting the hardwood floor, and stared at the void where my legacy had been displayed for decades. These medals weren't just metal, they were proof of nights spent in foreign deserts, mornings where frost bit deeper than any knife, and the camaraderie of men I would never see again. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had turned them into a trifling $200 transaction. I could still hear her laughter, clipped and careless, over the phone when I confronted her. "It's just some old medals, Dad. You have plenty more," she said, as if years of service and a lifetime of pride were negotiable commodities. The partial shop name appeared in her texts. "Golden Treasures," she had typed, a hint of triumph in the ellipsis. I scrolled back through messages, noting every slip, every inadvertent clue. My mind raced. How could I have been so blind? And yet, beneath the anger, there was a sharper sting. Betrayal was worse when it came from someone you trusted completely. I remembered opening that case years ago, running my fingers over polished surfaces, reliving battles and victories. Each medal had a story: the Bronze Star for courage under fire, the Army Commendation Medal for leadership, the Good Conduct Medal for, well, discipline earned in silence. And now they were gone, sold like common trinkets. The wind gusted harder, rattling the window latch. I glanced at the streets outside, imagining the shop under dim, yellow lights, the medals gleaming behind a glass counter that didn't belong to me anymore. A bitter taste of helplessness filled my mouth. My daughter's betrayal was a betrayal of our family's legacy, and of the man I had fought to become. I pulled the receipt closer, underlining the date with my fingernail. December 3rd, 2022. Every detail mattered. Every detail would matter when the reckoning came. I tried to calm myself, breathing in and out, listening to the quiet click of the old grandfather clock in the corner. The familiar ticking, once comforting, now felt accusatory. My mind traced a path forward, a series of small steps that could restore what was stolen, reclaim the medals, and more importantly, restore the respect that had been stripped away. I rose from the floor and walked to the study window, hands pressing against the cold glass. Across the street, the glow of shop fronts flickered in the early evening haze. "Golden Treasures," I whispered the name under my breath, tasting the words. Somewhere in that shop my medals lay, dull, tarnished by commerce. But mine, every coin, every document, every small fragment of evidence would be crucial. I retrieved my notebook, worn leather, edges fraying from years of use. I began jotting down every detail: dates, snippets of texts, the crumpled receipt itself, any mention of buyers or exchanges. My handwriting shook, but clarity grew with each note. I wasn't just documenting loss, I was plotting reclamation. The house was silent, save for the occasional groan of the old floorboards in the whistling winter wind. Memories of deployments, late nights under a foreign sky, the snap of gunfire, the camaraderie of men who became brothers collided with the stifling betrayal of my own daughter. I could almost hear the metals clinking together, mocking me from behind the shop window. And yet, beneath the rage, a thread of determination wove itself through my chest. I would not confront her blindly. I would not allow anger to cloud strategy. I had lived by discipline and patience. Now those virtues would guide me through this domestic battlefield. I laid out the partial evidence before me: the receipt, her texts, the faint hints of shop ownership, photographs I had of the medals themselves, and a mental note of who could verify authenticity: army buddies, colleagues, even the occasional civilian witness. Each piece, small on its own, was a thread in a larger web I would soon weave. The study felt colder now, the winter light fading. I closed the ledger, slipped the receipt into its page, and underlined the date once more, December 3rd. It would be my reference point, the day I first realized that betrayal could strike so close to home. The first day I understood that reclaiming honor wasn't just about the medals. It was about setting boundaries, restoring dignity, and teaching a lesson that would not soon be forgotten. Outside, the streets of New Orleans hummed with December life, streetcars clanging, distant laughter, vendors calling their last sales of the day. Inside, I made a silent vow. Every receipt, every document, every trace of my medals would lead me to justice. I would recover them, and my daughter would see in the most undeniable way the consequences of her betrayal. The first act of reclamation had begun, not with confrontation, but with observation, with documentation, with patient calculation. I would let the pieces fall into place, and when the moment came, I would act. The winter wind whispered through the window again, carrying with it the promise of the days to come, and for the first time since discovering the empty case, I felt a spark of controlled, focused resolve. This was the beginning of the path, the shattered case of my medals, and the first step in a journey that would test patience, strategy, and the endurance of a father's heart. I knew one thing for certain. I would get them back, piece by piece, and justice would follow. The night after discovering the empty case, I could hardly sleep. I lay in my study, blanket tangled around my shoulders, staring at the wall where my medals once gleamed. Every sound, the creak of the radiator, the distant hum of a streetcar, even my own heartbeat, felt amplified, echoing the void left by betrayal. Memories of deployments, firefights, frostbitten mornings and nights spent under foreign stars collided violently with the disbelief that my daughter, my own daughter, had traded decades of honor for $200. Her texts kept flashing on my phone, casual, dismissive, and infuriating. Relax, Dad. You're overreacting. I could feel the words like a punch to the chest, but I also recognized the dramatic irony. She had no idea that I was beginning to map every step, every buyer, every possible route to reclaim what was mine. Her ignorance was both a shield and a sword. It protected her from fear, but it made her blind to the consequences I was meticulously planning. I pictured the clink of metals in my hands, the weight of each one a tangible reminder of sacrifices she could never understand. I shuffled papers, old bank slips, letters from army superiors, photographs, anything that connected me to the life I had earned. Each crumpled page or faded photograph was a lifeline, evidence of a legacy that could not be erased. I could hear my footsteps echo in the empty house, each step a rhythmic reminder of isolation and impending strategy. I remembered one bitterly cold December night in Kandahar, watching a fellow soldier shiver as he held a wounded comrade, and I realized that grief had many forms. This was my grief now, not of bloodshed, but of trust broken, of betrayal that cut deeper than any combat wound. Every sigh, every shuffle of paper, every imagined jingle of metals heightened the tension inside me. I sat by the window, the city's lights blurred by winter rain, and questioned myself, am I overreacting or is this justice? The answer was as clear as the December air. I owed it to myself, to my history, to the truth of what I had built and defended. I began a mental ledger of allies, contacts I could trust, my old army buddy, who could confirm authenticity, the lawyer I had used for property disputes years ago, even the bank manager who understood my meticulous nature and could act as an instrument in subtle financial maneuvers, each person a node in the network I was beginning to construct. Her laughter, recorded in my memory, played like a loop in my mind. It stung, yet it also fueled a simmering patience. I imagined every misstep she might make, every lie she could spin, every attempt to cover her tracks. Patience was my weapon, calculated observation my shield, emotional restraint my armor. I shuffled through her texts again, noting subtle admissions, the ellipsis after the shop name, the casual mention of payment in cash, the indirect references to buyers who had no connection to her beyond a transaction. Each tiny clue was a thread in a tapestry I would soon weave, slowly, meticulously. The hours bled together, marked only by the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock. I made notes on paper, lined them meticulously, underlining dates and times, annotating possible witnesses, potential legal avenues. This was no longer just a personal loss. It was a battle for reclamation, and my strategy had to be flawless. By dawn, the city was a pale gray under the winter sun, and I felt the first surge of controlled resolve. Anger had transformed into methodical purpose. The house was still silent, but my mind was alive with possibilities. My daughter's blind spots would be my advantage. My allies would be my instruments. Every action would be deliberate, every step planned. I took one last look at the empty display case, tracing the outlines of where each medal had rested. I whispered to the shadows, "I will get them back, every last one." The emotional collapse was complete, but it had birthed clarity, strategy, and a patient, simmering determination. The first phase of my reckoning was over, but the journey was only beginning. I knew the days ahead would be a careful dance of observation, coordination, and psychological maneuvering. Each move would test patience and precision. But I had survived deserts, firefights, and frost. I would survive this betrayal too, and the reward would be justice reclaimed, legacy restored. By the third day after the discovery, I realized anger alone would not bring my medals back. I needed clarity, a map of betrayal and allies who could navigate the shadows where my daughter had already walked. The first step was to hire a private investigator, someone discreet, capable, and familiar with New Orleans' labyrinthine shop networks. I wanted the trail of my medals traced without alarming her, without giving her the slightest hint that the reckoning was already in motion. I met the PI, a lean man named Carter, in a small cafe on Royal Street. Steam rose from our coffees as he leaned across the table, pen in hand, notebook open. "Show me everything," I said, sliding the crumpled $200 receipt across the table. He examined it carefully, noting the date, amount, and partial shop name. Golden Treasures. Legible enough to be useful. I gave him the text thread, highlighting her careless ellipsis and photos of the medals I had taken years earlier for insurance. Every scrap of information, every micro detail, mattered. Carter nodded, his eyes sharp. "We'll follow the trail. Expect delays. Some of these buyers are cautious, some shady." I nodded in agreement. Returning home, I felt the house heavier than usual, the winter air pressing in through the old window frames. Each creak of the floorboards seemed louder, each gust of wind a whisper reminding me that time was moving against me. I began cataloging every conversation, every potential lead, creating a ledger with columns for buyer, transaction date, shop location, and witness. Every note was a thread in a tapestry of recovery that I would weave meticulously. I called my lawyer Marlene, who had handled my property disputes years ago. Her voice was calm, steady, professional. "We need to prepare legal options," I said. "Affidavits, cease and desist letters, any tool to prevent resale or transfer. Timing is crucial." She understood immediately, and together we mapped potential legal strategies without alerting my daughter. The combination of PI work and legal groundwork would corner the situation from two directions simultaneously, one visible, one invisible. Meanwhile, I reached out to an old Army buddy, James, who had been with me through deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. He was the only one who could verify authenticity beyond question. "You have photos, receipts, any serial numbers?" he asked. I confirmed everything. "Good," he said. "I'll keep track. If they try to sell or pawn them, you'll know." That assurance gave me a measure of peace amidst the storm of betrayal. As the days passed, Carter began reporting minor breakthroughs, one buyer in mid-city, another hesitant to part with a set, the shop owner initially evasive but hinting at partial inventory. The daughter, unaware of the coordination behind the scenes, continued to send dismissive messages, her casual confidence a stark contrast to the web of strategy I was constructing. Every misplaced text, every accidental clue added to my advantage. The dramatic irony of her ignorance was palpable. Back at home, I traced routes between shops, noting distances, hours, and patterns. Winter sun slanted across the study desk as I plotted likely paths my daughter's transactions had followed. My eyes pored over maps, phone screenshots, and receipt copies. Each line on paper was a potential recovery, each number a clue. I could almost feel the weight of the metals in my hands, hear the faint clink of metal against metal, and see them resting once more in their rightful case. Despite small setbacks, the occasional untraceable metal, partial records missing, hesitations from buyers, I maintained composure. Every day was documented text screenshots, photographs, and brief notes on verbal encounters. I made a mental note of potential foreshadowing for the holiday dinner confrontation, knowing it would be the stage for revelation and justice. Subtle hints planted in conversation would heighten the eventual impact. By the end of the week, a picture was beginning to form. The shop owner, reluctantly cooperative, provided partial inventory lists. Carter confirmed the movements of secondary buyers. Marlene drafted preliminary affidavits and legal letters, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Every ally was in position, every piece of evidence accounted for. Sitting alone that evening, the New Orleans streets illuminated by lamplight, I felt the first real surge of control. The emotional collapse had evolved into strategy. Grief had transformed into methodical action. My daughter remained oblivious to the orchestration behind her casual text messages and flippant jokes. The dramatic irony heightened the satisfaction I knew would come. As night fell, I organized the materials on the study table: maps, text screenshots, partial receipts, and photographs. Each item was a weapon of strategy, a puzzle piece in the reclamation of honor. I traced the shop name once more, Golden Treasures, and imagined the upcoming days of careful maneuvering, subtle legal pressure, and gentle but firm recovery. Patience would be key. Observation would be paramount. And when the moment arrived, every step would converge in the most precise and satisfying way. By the end of Act 3, I had a clear, actionable picture of the betrayal's architecture. The daughter was still blind to the consequences, the shop owner partially cooperative, and my network of allies firmly in place. The path forward was no longer a guessing game. It was a meticulously drawn map, a blueprint for reclaiming every metal, every piece of dignity, and every fragment of justice owed. By the first week of December, the pieces were in motion. The crumpled $200 receipt lay open on my desk like a taunt, yet also a map. Carter, my private investigator, had identified two of the buyers, one a local collector in Mid-City, the other a hesitant resale shop owner near the French Quarter. Each lead was a thread, each conversation a potential knot I could tie securely. I could almost hear the faint metallic clink of my metals in the back of my mind, each sound spurring me toward action. I began with the collector. Winter light slanted through the blinds as I walked into the mid-city apartment building, the faint smell of damp cement and cigarette smoke greeting me. My army buddy, James, had verified every metal's authenticity. I held copies of the original photographs, receipts, and serial numbers, carefully cataloged in a leather folder. The door buzzed open and I ascended the narrow staircase, each step creaking underfoot. The collector greeted me with cautious curiosity. "Can I help you?" he asked, glancing at my folder. I handed him a copy of the receipt and photographs. "These were sold by my daughter without my permission. I am here to recover them. You have nothing to fear if you cooperate," I said firmly. The subtle firmness, the measured tone, conveyed both authority and calm. After a few tense moments, he nodded reluctantly and agreed to return the medals. I placed them in a soft-lined case I had brought, feeling their weight, hearing the satisfying clink as each settled. Next, the resale shop. Golden Treasures, its dimly lit windows gleamed against the winter dusk. The shop owner was evasive at first, fidgeting with the counter and muttering about partial inventory, delays, and third-party buyers. I remained patient, laying out the documents: purchase records, photographs, text messages from my daughter, and affidavits prepared by Marlene. My tone was unwavering, my presence calm yet commanding. Slowly the shop owner relented, returning several medals and providing a partial list of those still unaccounted for. One small twist arose. One buyer threatened to resell immediately, if I did not act fast. I remained composed, coordinating with Carter and Marlene via discreet messages. Legal pressure combined with strategic financial leverage ensured compliance without confrontation. Each recovered medal reinforced my sense of justice, yet I restrained any impulse toward triumphalism. Anger had been replaced by deliberate, measured action. As I cataloged the medals at home, arranging them in the study under careful light, I allowed myself a brief reflection. The weight of each medal reminded me not just of battles fought, but of patience earned, strategy applied, and principles upheld. The daughter, still oblivious, continued her casual texts, unknowingly hinting at future blunders. Every oversight on her part became a stepping stone for my recovery plan. Winter gusts rattled the windows as I noted the remaining metals to recover, plotting the sequence of next steps. Each phone call, each legal letter, each discreet visit to a buyer was recorded meticulously, adding to my ledger of evidence. I made mental notes of who could corroborate authenticity, who might resist, and who could be persuaded. The map of recovery was now both tangible and detailed, a framework for precise action. By nightfall, the house was quiet, save for the faint click of the grandfather clock. I placed the recovered medals in a temporary case on the desk, running my fingers over them, feeling both satisfaction and the simmering resolve that the work was far from complete. Each successful recovery reinforced patience as a weapon, strategy as armor, and methodical execution as the path to justice. The first wave of reclamation concluded, yet the journey continued. Every micro step, each visit, each document, each conversation was a building block toward total recovery. I allowed myself a measured breath, knowing the daughter remained unaware, the shop owner partially cooperative, and my allies fully engaged. The stage was being set for the next phases, the subtle confrontations that would eventually culminate in undeniable justice. By mid-December, the daughter's careless confidence became my advantage. She continued to send flippant texts, unaware that every word, every ellipsis, every misplaced detail was feeding the plan I had begun to execute. "Relax, Dad, you're overthinking it," one message read. I allowed a quiet smile, dramatic irony heightened as she remained blind to the consequences of her actions. Her ignorance was a weapon I would wield with patience and precision. I spent the morning reviewing the ledger, which metals had been recovered, which buyers still needed to be contacted, which legal measures Marlene had prepared. Carter provided updates on the remaining transactions, noting hesitation from one buyer in the French Quarter and an inventory discrepancy at Golden Treasures. Each small obstacle required careful navigation. Impatience could unravel weeks of strategy. I reminded myself that every move must be deliberate, every interaction calculated. The wind whistled through the half-open window, carrying the faint scent of roasted chestnuts. I shuffled papers, running my fingers over receipts and photographs, noting serial numbers and partial purchase records. Each small detail mattered. One missed date, one overlooked buyer, and the plan could falter. I made calls to buyers and intermediaries, leveraging both legal letters and subtle financial pressure, ensuring cooperation without alerting the daughter. She, blissfully unaware, misread my movements. "What is he even doing?" I imagined her thinking. This misinterpretation worked in my favor. She assumed distraction or indulgence, never suspecting that a methodical recovery was unfolding around her. Every mistake she made, every casual remark, became fodder for strategic advantage. Dramatic irony intensified. The audience knows consequences she cannot yet see. At Golden Treasures, the shop owner grew uneasy. I arranged discreet meetings, papers shuffled across counters, coins clinking in pockets. Subtle threats of legal action, coupled with verified documentation, forced compliance. One buyer nearly sold a medal prematurely, but careful coordination with Carter prevented a loss. The feeling of control, tempered by restraint, was powerful. I resisted triumphalism. Patience was my currency. Afternoons were filled with mapping recovery sequences, confirming affidavits, and coordinating ally efforts. My lawyer prepared cease and desist notices ready for deployment, while Carter tracked every micro-movement of the remaining metals. Winter sunlight slanted through blinds onto receipts and photos, illuminating the precise documentation that would form the backbone of eventual justice. The daughter's texts, casual and unaware, continued, "You worry too much, Dad. Just let it go." I allowed a quiet inward chuckle. Her words only reinforced my resolve. I documented each communication, every subtle clue that hinted at her ignorance of legal consequences. Each misstep she unknowingly made added to the mosaic of recovery and set the stage for inevitable exposure. As night fell, I placed the partial recovery medals on the study desk, lined neatly, each clink resonating in the quiet house. I reviewed the remaining leads, noting potential points of friction, buyer's temperament and shop owner tendencies. Every detail was recorded, every step accounted for. The daughter remained blissfully oblivious, her blind spot widening as my plans strengthened. By the close of the day, a sense of measured satisfaction settled over me. The meticulous orchestration of legal letters, financial leverage, and strategic coordination with allies was paying dividends. I felt the first real surge of forward momentum, control, strategy, and patience converging to reclaim both honor and justice. The holiday confrontation, still distant in days but close in anticipation, loomed like a crescendo, and every element was now in place to make it inevitable. By the second week of December, the daughter's ignorance had become an unmistakable advantage. Every casual text, every dismissive comment, and every laugh-filled voice memo she sent reinforced the strategy I had painstakingly laid. "Relax, Dad. You worry too much," one text read. She had no idea that each word, each careless slip, was fueling the recovery of my metals. Dramatic irony sharpened with each message. I knew her moves before she did. The shop owner, Golden Treasures, grew increasingly uneasy. Carter's daily updates tracked every micro step, hesitant buyers, delayed shipments, and partial inventory lists. I reviewed the ledger meticulously, annotating serial numbers, purchase dates, and subtle discrepancies in sales records. Winter sunlight filtered through the study blinds, illuminating receipts, photographs, and affidavit drafts. Each item was a critical piece of evidence in a growing network that would soon close around both the shop owner and my daughter. One minor crisis emerged when a buyer hinted at an immediate resale. My pulse remained steady, controlled. I coordinated with Carter, alerting Marlene to prepare legal letters and potential cease and desist filings. Every action was precise, deliberate. Emotional restraint had become armor, patience my weapon. I knew that even the smallest misstep could undo weeks of preparation. I began subtle financial maneuvers, leveraging past transactions, bank holds, and pending payments. The shop owner sensed pressure. The daughter remained oblivious, and the remaining metals began to converge toward recovery. Each call, each discreet visit, each document verified added another layer to the tapestry of reclamation. The weight of my plan was both heavy and empowering. Winter gusts rattled the study windows as I reviewed the remaining leads. I mapped routes for each metal, noted times when buyers could be approached, and documented every minor interaction. Coins clinked, papers slid, and my hands moved over receipts and photographs with practiced precision. The meticulous tracking made each action deliberate. No metal would slip through unnoticed. The daughter's text continued, casual and unknowing. "Seriously, Dad, let it go. You're too intense." I allowed a quiet chuckle, savoring the dramatic irony. Each misstep she made, each assumption of my inactivity, built the foundation for eventual exposure. Her blind spot widened while my strategy solidified. As evening fell, street lamps flickered outside, casting shadows across the study. I paced, tracing each potential outcome, visualizing the moment when all lines would converge, the recovered metals, the shop owner compliant, and the daughter confronted with undeniable truth. Every micro beat, the shuffle of papers, the subtle click of coins, the faint jingle of the temporary metal case was noted in the ledger, forming a precise log for the coming climax. By night's end, every line had been drawn, every detail accounted for, allies were in position, legal measures ready, and remaining metals tracked to the last. Patience, observation, and subtle pressure had turned chaos into control. The holiday confrontation, still days away, now loomed with inevitability, a crescendo of justice meticulously choreographed. The winter wind whispered again through the window, carrying both resolve and anticipation, and I felt the quiet thrill of impending closure. The evening of December 24th arrived with crisp winter air and streets glittering under holiday lights. Inside the house, the living room was decorated modestly but warmly. Pine garlands draped along the mantel, flickering candles on the table, and the faint aroma of roasted turkey and cinnamon filling the air. Family members mingled, oblivious to the storm that had been quietly building for weeks. My daughter, radiant in her holiday dress, laughed at jokes I barely heard, her phone clutched carelessly in her hand, unaware of the reckoning approaching with deliberate certainty. I had arranged the recovered metals in a soft-lined case on the sideboard, each piece cataloged, documented, and photographed. Receipts, affidavits, and purchase records were discreetly stacked in a leather folder within reach. Allies were present but unobtrusive. James, my army buddy, seated quietly at the corner, eyes alert, Marlene, my lawyer, observing calmly from across the room, ready for any escalation. Every micro detail was aligned. As dinner commenced, I waited until the laughter reached a lull, the clinking of cutlery blending with the low hum of conversation. I cleared my throat, drawing subtle attention without alarm. The daughter glanced up, her expression curious but untroubled. "I think it's time we spoke about something important." I began, voice steady, calm, commanding attention. I placed the folder on the table and slid it gently toward her. She frowned slightly, tilting her head. "What's this, Dad?" she asked, a hint of unease flickering in her eyes. I opened the folder, revealing the photographs of her transaction, the crumpled $200 receipt, text screenshots, and affidavits from Carter and other witnesses. "These," I said, pointing to the documents, "are the pieces of what you sold without permission. Each metal, every transaction, every receipt has been traced and verified." The metallic clink of the recovered metals in the case punctuated my words, drawing eyes across the room. Her face paled, disbelief and defiance mingling. "Dad, I didn't think," she stammered. I held up a hand to pause her, my voice firm but calm. "You didn't lose me. You gave me away." The words hung in the air, weighty and final. She glanced at the metals, then at the assembled family, realization dawning with each second. James's gaze met mine briefly, a silent affirmation, while Marlene observed, ensuring all legal bases were accounted for. The daughter's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the case, but I withdrew it calmly, placing it back on the sideboard. Every document, every photograph, and every recovered metal told the story of her misjudgment, her blind spot, and the meticulous work that had restored order and honor. The room was quiet now, save for the soft crackle of the fireplace and the low hum of conversation restarting hesitantly. I recounted, calmly and firmly, the timeline of recovery, how buyers had been contacted, how partial cooperation from the shop owner had been secured, and how every legal safeguard had been applied. The clarity of evidence left no room for argument or deflection. She sank into her chair, the weight of realization pressing down. Eyes glistening, a mix of guilt and shame, she finally whispered, "I didn't realize, I never imagined." The words trailed into silence, for the truth was undeniable. Every metal had been accounted for, every document corroborated, and the chain of custody unbroken. I placed my hand gently over hers on the table, grounding the moment in measured empathy. "Some lessons are learned only when confronted with consequences," I said softly. The dramatic irony resolved fully. She saw the breadth of what her actions had set in motion, while the audience had witnessed the careful orchestration leading to this moment. As the evening continued, the medals remained on display, not as trophies of revenge, but symbols of restored honor, patience, and strategic justice. The daughter's defiance had collapsed, replaced with a quiet acknowledgement of responsibility. Allies observed with satisfaction, ensuring the moral and legal clarity of the act was preserved. Every microbeat, the clinking of utensils, the subtle rustle of papers, the soft murmur of restored conversation, underscored the emotional and ethical victory. By the end of dinner, the room settled into a reflective calm. The holiday had been transformed into a stage of reckoning, a convergence of patience, strategy, and moral clarity. Every ally, every document, every recovered metal had played its role, and I, standing at the center of this intricate choreography, felt the profound satisfaction of justice achieved. The morning after the holiday dinner, the house felt different, lighter, calmer, yet filled with a quiet sense of restored order. I walked through the study, carefully placing the recovered metals back into their designated case. Each one gleamed in the winter sun streaming through the window, their weight and presence a tangible reminder of the legacy that had almost been lost. The crumpled $200 receipt, once a symbol of betrayal, was now filed in the ledger alongside photographs, affidavits, and correspondence, a record of careful strategy and methodical execution. The daughter remained silent, her gaze often lingering on the medals. I noticed subtle changes, hesitation in her movements, a tentative acknowledgement of consequences. She avoided the casual confidence that had marked her earlier communications, now replaced with quiet introspection. It was clear that the events of the previous night had left a lasting impression. Each recovered medal was not just a symbol of military service, but a marker of responsibility, accountability, and restored honor. I began cataloging the medals meticulously, photographing each one, cross-referencing serial numbers, dates of issuance, and associated certificates. The process was deliberate, almost ritualistic. Winter sunlight illuminated the room, casting long shadows across the study, highlighting the organized rows of evidence. Each document, each photograph, each signature in the affidavits reinforced the tangible proof that the reclamation had been executed with precision. Outside, the streets of New Orleans hummed with holiday activity, yet inside, the house maintained a serene focus. I reviewed financial transactions, ensuring that payments, recoveries, and legal fees had been properly recorded. The shop, now partially closed to prevent further complications, had been reconciled with our ledger. The daughter, observing quietly, seemed to internalize the implications of every recovered item and every documented action. The atmosphere carried subtle cues of accountability. Coins were counted, papers stacked, and receipts filed with exacting precision. Each microbeat, the shuffle of documents, the faint clink of metals, the soft crackle of the fireplace added to the sense of restored order. I ensured that every recovered medal, every affidavit, and every ledger entry was documented for long-term clarity and verification. By late afternoon, the process of rebuilding legacy felt complete in its first stage. The daughter had begun to understand the weight of responsibility, and I had regained control over the tangible symbols of my life's work. The house, once marked by betrayal and tension, now resonated with quiet resolve and measured reflection. Every document, every medal, every micro-step taken reinforced a narrative of justice, patience, and strategic action. As winter sun dipped toward the horizon, I placed the last of the recovered medals in the case, checking serial numbers one final time. Each piece was a marker of discipline, of honor reclaimed, and of meticulous planning that had brought order from chaos. The process had been deliberate, painstaking, but the outcome was undeniable. Legacy restored, dignity intact, and a powerful lesson imparted. By the following week, formal restitution was underway. The daughter had agreed to a detailed acknowledgement of the transactions, her signature on affidavits confirming the return of every medal, and her commitment to uphold boundaries moving forward. The legal documents, prepared meticulously by Marlene, left no ambiguity. Each line, each clause, and each notarized signature reinforced accountability, ensuring the recovery was not just physical but official, indisputable, and permanent. I watched her complete the documents, hands trembling slightly as she signed, realizing the gravity of her actions. "I understand," she whispered, voice low, almost defeated. The weight of consequence finally settled upon her shoulders. Dramatic irony played fully now. The audience, as well as I, had witnessed her blind spots long before she had. The justice was measured, proportional, and undeniable. The medals were returned to their rightful display case, arranged with care under the warm winter light. Each clink as I handled them echoed the satisfaction of order restored, of honor reclaimed. I meticulously checked every serial number, cross-referenced photographs, and reviewed each affidavit once more. Every detail had been preserved. No medal unaccounted for, no discrepancy overlooked. The physical proof was complete, tangible, and irrevocable. James, my army buddy, observed quietly, verifying authenticity and providing affirmation that the medals were exactly as they had been before the betrayal. His calm presence reinforced the legitimacy of the process. Marlene oversaw the legal aspects, ensuring that the daughter's acknowledgments were enforceable, recorded, and beyond dispute. Each ally played a precise, indispensable role in ensuring that justice was not only symbolic but enforceable. The daughter, seated quietly, seemed to internalize the weight of responsibility. Subtle gestures, a lowered gaze, careful movements, tentative glances toward the medals signaled reflection. She had learned at last that actions carry consequences and that betrayal, even of a parent, cannot remain unchecked. The moral clarity of the moment was undeniable. Boundaries had been established and reinforced. Outside, winter light faded over New Orleans streets, quiet and cold. Inside, the house resonated with restored order. I counted coins, stacked receipts, and reviewed ledger entries to ensure financial accountability was complete. Each task, meticulous and deliberate, reinforced the permanence of restitution. Every microbeat, the shuffle of documents, the subtle metallic clink of metals, the soft crackle of the fireplace, underscored the comprehensive nature of justice achieved. By evening, the process of justice was fully realized. Medals were back in their rightful place. The daughter had formally acknowledged her missteps, and every ally had observed and verified the proceedings. Accountability was not just symbolic, it was institutionalized, ethical, and undeniable. The act of justice was complete, leaving a legacy of discipline, patience, and moral clarity that could not be challenged or undermined. Weeks had passed since the holiday dinner and the full recovery of my medals. The house, once tense with betrayal and uncertainty, now held a quiet dignity. I sat in the study, the winter sunlight slanting across the recovered metals, their polished surfaces gleaming like frozen echoes of my past. Each one held stories of courage, sacrifice, and endurance, reminders of nights in foreign deserts, mornings in frostbitten camps, and the comrades who had fought beside me. The journey had been arduous, but the outcome left a deep, measured satisfaction. As I reflected, I realized that the real battle had not been against my daughter, the buyers, or the shop owner. It had been against complacency, against letting anger dictate action, and against allowing betrayal to corrode patience and judgment. Justice, I understood, required strategy, discipline, and clarity. Every microbeat of the process, the meticulous documentation, legal letters, careful coordination with allies had been essential. The crumpled $200 receipt that once mocked me was now filed permanently, a reminder that even small details can chart the course of restoration. I thought of my daughter, who had come to understand, finally, the weight of her choices. She had internalized the consequences, and boundaries had been reestablished. The lessons were subtle but profound. Actions have consequences. Trust is fragile, and legacy is not merely inherited, it is earned and defended. Her reflection, quiet and tentative, was a testament to accountability and moral growth. I leaned back, running my fingers across the polished desk, eyes tracing the outlines of the medals in their case. The study felt alive with history, restored honor, and ethical clarity. Every document, every affidavit, every photograph had played a part in ensuring justice was not only served but enduring. Allies had observed quietly, each confirming that the process was both legitimate and thorough. The journey had taught me patience, discipline, and measured resolve. It had reminded me that vengeance is hollow if untempered by principle, and that justice is only as meaningful as the care taken to uphold it. I realized that my own reflection, my calm persistence, my attention to detail, my ethical approach had been just as crucial as the recovery of physical metals. Winter sunlight dimmed, casting long shadows across the study, illuminating every meticulously arranged document, every carefully placed medal. I whispered, almost to myself, an aphorism that had become my guiding truth. Some things you cannot buy, but you can always take back what's yours. The weight of the words settled comfortably in my chest. They were both a personal mantra and a moral reflection on the events that had unfolded. By evening, the house was quiet, and I felt a profound sense of closure. Betrayal had been met with patience, strategy, and unwavering principle. Legacy was restored, honor reclaimed, and moral clarity preserved. Every element, the evidence, the allies, the recovered metals stood as a testament to the power of deliberate, principled action. In reclaiming what was mine, I had reaffirmed not only the value of what I had earned, but also the importance of measured ethical justice in a world too often governed by impulsive choices. The weeks following the holiday reckoning settled into a quiet rhythm. The house, once heavy with tension, now resonated with a sense of order restored. The metals remained in their rightful case, each gleaming under the winter sunlight that filtered through the study windows. Receipts, affidavits, and photographs were filed meticulously, a permanent record of the methodical recovery process. The ledger, annotated with dates, serial numbers, and buyer details, served as an immutable testament to careful planning and execution. The daughter moved quietly through the house. Her demeanor changed. The casual confidence that had marked her earlier days was replaced with reflection and a tentative acknowledgement of responsibility. She did not speak of the past recklessness, but her gestures, slower, deliberate, and careful, signaled understanding. Observing her, I noted the subtlety of internalized consequences, a lowered gaze when passing the metal case, measured words, and careful handling of documents she now understood were serious. I took the opportunity to send her a reflective letter, articulating both the importance of accountability and the enduring value of honesty. I reminded her that trust once broken is fragile, and that privilege carries responsibility. The tone was firm but measured, emphasizing lessons learned rather than lingering resentment. She read the letter in quiet contemplation, acknowledging the principles it outlined without argument. Outside, the streets of New Orleans carried the usual winter rhythm, streetcars clanging softly, vendors calling the last of their seasonal sales, and distant laughter carrying faintly over the air. Inside, I methodically reconciled the financial aspects of the recovery, ensuring all transactions, legal fees, and incidental expenses were recorded and balanced. Coins counted, receipts filed, and documents double-checked. The process confirmed that every element of restitution had been addressed. The shop, now closed under controlled management, no longer posed a risk of inadvertent loss. Partial inventory had been verified, and any remaining metals were either returned or accounted for through legal documentation. Allies, James and Marlene, continued to verify and confirm authenticity, ensuring the entire process remained transparent and complete. Evenings became quiet moments of reflection. I cataloged the metals again, cross-referencing serial numbers and checking for inconsistencies. Each successful recovery reinforced the sense of closure, and the daughter's altered behavior underscored the permanence of the lesson. Patience, discipline, and meticulous documentation had transformed what began as a betrayal into a comprehensive moral and material restoration. By the end of the month, the house held a settled calm. The daughter understood, at least partially, the consequences of her actions, and family dynamics had shifted subtly but meaningfully. Metals were safe, legacy preserved, and responsibility acknowledged. The aftermath was not just quiet, it was a living, breathing record of justice, measured consequence, and restored honor, all achieved through careful planning, observation, and unwavering adherence to principle. A few days into January, long after the recovery and formal restitution, an unexpected message arrived. A collector, intrigued by the story of my medals, offered a duplicate set for charity, an identical replica of one of the awards I had spent years earning. My first reaction was amusement. The thought of owning another set, technically unnecessary, tickled a small, ironic corner of my mind. Yet the offer carried no appeal. Victory, after all, had never been about accumulation. It had been about restoration, principle, and the tangible reclamation of what was rightfully mine. I declined the offer politely but firmly, sending a brief note explaining that the personal journey of recovery had been the true reward. The irony of the gesture was not lost on me. Someone attempting to replicate the honor I had fought for could not replicate the story, the sacrifice, or the lessons embedded within each medal. The narrative, carefully reconstructed through months of patience, strategy, and meticulous documentation, was uniquely mine. The daughter, now fully aware of the consequences of her actions, observed quietly as I cataloged and verified the recovered collection once again. Each medal was returned to its rightful place, cross-checked against affidavits, photographs, and serial numbers. Coins counted, receipts filed, and every ledger entry confirmed. The process underscored not just justice served, but the precision and permanence of restoration. Her gestures, slower, measured, thoughtful, demonstrated the internalization of responsibility. She had seen firsthand the outcome of carelessness and dishonesty, and the lesson had been imprinted in both subtle and profound ways. Winter sunlight fell across the study desk. As I examined the metals, their surfaces polished and gleaming, each reflected not only past service and honor, but also the deliberate actions that had reclaimed them. The irony of the duplicate offer now felt almost poetic, recognition that what was truly valuable cannot be replicated or purchased, only earned, defended, and restored with patience, principle, and diligence. Outside, New Orleans remained alive with winter activity, but inside, the house resonated with quiet certainty. Legacy was preserved, betrayal had been addressed, strategy had prevailed, and justice was complete. The daughter's behavior, reflective and measured, confirmed that consequences had been internalized. Allies remained quietly satisfied with the seamless execution of the reclamation and restitution process. As the day waned, I closed the ledger and arranged the medals one final time. The journey from discovery through betrayal, collapse, methodical planning, and eventual confrontation had concluded. Every receipt, affidavit, photograph, and microbeat documented had contributed to this resolution. I leaned back, absorbing the quiet, reflective satisfaction of victory that was personal, deliberate, and complete. No duplicates, no shortcuts, no illusions, only the authentic restoration of honor and legacy. The ironic twist was clear. The true value of what had been taken could never be replicated. The daughter, the shop, the collectors, none could alter the principle that had guided the recovery. Every medal returned, every boundary restored, every lesson internalized, ensured that what was mine had been defended in both tangible and moral terms. Justice had been served, not only through restitution, but through measured consequence, strategy, and ethical persistence.